Good afternoon. We're going to wait for a few people to file in to the presentation first, and then we'll get started. Okay, seems like a bunch of people have entered the Zoom room here. So welcome. And today I'm here with Sensible Financial Management and Planning and Management, if I can get the company name right. So sorry about that. And they're presenting older adult living options. The presenters today are Rick Miller, the founder and CEO of the company, and Laura Williams, a financial advisor with the company who's been there for about 8 years. And the two will describe options for older adult living. This is the first of 4 webinars. The next one will be long-term care overview of planning and insurance on February 17th. The third will be basic housing options for older adults on March 10th. And the fourth will be continuing care retirement communities, CCRCs, an introduction. And that will be on April 21st. They're all on Thursdays at 2 p.m. And welcome, and take it away, Laura and Rick.
Thank you, Carrie. Sensible Financial is a fee-only financial planning firm with a strong educational mission, and this is our 20th year of practice. And we're pleased today to talk about older adult housing and older adult living options at a conceptual level. We're going to review the specific issues that older adults address with their housing decisions, the primary choices that they have to face, and our ideas about how people should think this through. Laura and I both have substantial professional experience in planning for housing and retirement. We have many clients who've asked us to help them think through the financial implications of their housing decisions. And the discussions that have gone along with that have covered many of the personal implications as well. And in addition, I have a considerable personal experience of this, as I'm sure many of you on the webinar have. I've worked with a couple of my older relatives, one of them my mother and another an aunt, in making and then living with housing decisions over a good number of years. So this is a topic that has special significance and importance for me. This series is going to cover a lot of ground, and we're going to focus on, over the series, we're going to focus on the key financial planning implications of aging and housing decisions. And first of all, while the specifics are uncertain, the general tendencies of aging are well known and predictable, and it's wise to plan with these tendencies in mind. You cannot eliminate the impact of these tendencies on your life or your plan, but thoughtful planning can reduce the drama, potential drama, can reduce unpleasantness, and can just, in general, help things go a lot more smoothly. Aging in place with your family is attractive as a possibility and an option, but it is possible to have that impose significant burdens on your family members if your plan is not complete and not fully thought through and developed. And finally, while long-term care costs are high, if you look at the sticker price, if you will, that substantially overstates the likely impact on your plan, because a lot of those sticker prices include costs that are already covered in your financial plan. And we're not going to talk about all of these items today, but I wanted to emphasize that, I wanted to highlight the takeaways from the series as a whole. Okay, so let's start with what goes on as people get older and move into retirement. And there's been, I was actually disappointed when I looked at the research on this. There is not nearly as much data as I had hoped there would be. And so this is, I've called this a conceptual perspective on capabilities in aging, because this was kind of the best I could do. And you'll see that we've got 3 areas of capability, and I've labeled them physical strength and math skills and vocabulary, and I've kind of cobbled together information from a number of different studies to give a sense of what's going on. And basically, as people get older, people are less physically active and strong. Importantly, what's called crystallized intelligence, life experience and wisdom grows, and that's not shown here. I couldn't find any data on that, but that seems to be true. What's called fluid intelligence, and that's rapid calculation and so forth, that declines. That you see that here in the math skills area, and none of us is as good at math as we were when we were 20, is the basic message there, and it doesn't get better. But that doesn't I think tell us much about quality of life. I think it just tells us that there are issues that we need to be dealing with, and life is different in retirement than before, but life has been different throughout your life. If you've had children, you know that life with young children and life with teenagers is not the same. Life is different at 40 than at 20, at 60 than at 40, and it's not rational to expect it to be the same at 80 as it was at 60, or at 100 as it was at 80 or 60. So when we're thinking about lots of decisions, but in particular housing decisions, it's important to bear that in mind. Also, as people get older, there is risk of illness, and this is something that a lot of people are very concerned about. We've marked or graphed here various age-related illnesses, and you see that the probability of suffering from one of these or more of these rises as people get older. But importantly, you'll notice that by far less than 100%. I mean, here we're at less than 40% for all of these, even for people in their 90s. So while that risk of illness rises, and some illnesses require more help, and some illnesses imply frailty and less physical ability and resilience, you may not experience any of these problems. And if you're here thinking about your parents may not experience any of these problems. But it's important to recognize that there is that possibility. And as you're thinking about that, we're recommending that you think about that broadly and conceptually. And because it's not predictable whether you will need help and sort of how things will develop, we think that it makes sense to structure your living arrangements to make it easier to react if something does happen. And that means, or that helps you minimize the effort that's required to adjust your housing if your needs do change. It allows you to focus your energy and your family's energy and your friends' energy on the key issues that arise, rather than having to focus on those and on what to do about housing at the same time. And if you are successful in structuring your living arrangements to react well, that increases the likelihood of good outcomes for your health, for your care, and for life generally. As people move into retirement, their ideal housing changes. And just as at different stages in life. So your housing decision is different than when you're starting out, when you're accommodating a growing family. And as we've said, your capabilities will change as you age, and your housing decision has to recognize that. So you have to think about um, uh, when you're looking at the house, how much stair climbing is required? Uh, are the shelves within reach without climbing onto a ladder or a stool? How will you be able to entertain? Entertaining can become more challenging and more tiring as you're older, and that's something that your space needs to recognize. How much entertaining are you going to do? How will you do it? Uh, and we recommend that people, when they're thinking about housing, plan for the changes that may be coming, and those changes are both physical. Importantly, there's also what I call emotional energy. As people get older, they have somewhat less emotional energy, and that's not something that our clients have found to be obvious. Something else to think about, or other things to think about, are if you plan to change your residence, if you plan to move maybe multiple times in retirement, it's wise to recognize that your capabilities are changing also. And while packing up is kind of an unpleasant chore, let's say in your 30s and 40s when you're moving to a larger house to accommodate your family that's growing, it can become more difficult both physically and emotionally as you get older. Uh, if you're thinking about renovating a property, that's also not as easy. Decision making is required. There's a lot of decisions to make. Decisions take a lot of energy. And then managing others' activities in renovation also is more difficult. I don't know how many people on the call have done home renovations, but if you have, you know that nothing ever goes exactly according to plan. The contractor always has uh, uh, something always comes up that wasn't expected, and you have to decide what to do, and that becomes more difficult as one gets older. And you'll notice that at the end here, I've talked about preserving flexibility without requiring nimbleness. And what I mean there is it's helpful to have a single flexible solution, one house that can accommodate changing needs, changing capabilities, so that you don't have to move to respond to every little change that occurs. Another approach to getting flexibility without requiring nimbleness is a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Laura will talk about that a little bit later. So as you are thinking about where you might want to move next, here are some questions to consider and think through. Just as earlier in your life, your living arrangements must meet your current needs and your future needs. When you had young children, if you had young children, you thought about bedrooms and bathrooms and the school system. And now the questions are different, but they're still important. And these questions deal with the physical design and flexibility of the space, and how those will align with your capabilities now and your capabilities as they may evolve. How well will this space support your social interactions with your family, with your friends? If you're if you may be relying on your children to help at some point, then having the house or the living arrangements designed so that it makes it easy for them to get to you, to to help you if you need help. That's also important to bear in mind. And then finally, we're financial planners and financial advisors. It has to relate well to your financial capabilities and financial requirements, what you can afford, what you're planning to leave as a legacy, and so forth. Okay, so Carrie, this is a good place to pause and take questions.
Right. If you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier, but you guys have been typing in different things. So if you have any questions, but now I have a question that we can start with, and that is, you mentioned having health issues as as you get older, potential health issues, and then needing different options, living options at that point. At what point do you start actually thinking about that? Or, should I start planning for things like that in the future? Is there an age or anything, or a number of years before,
Right. That's a very good question. The simple answer, and perhaps a little bit of a silly answer, is it's never too early. I think our experience with clients is that people start at different ages, and when I think that certainly, if you're thinking about retirement and you're thinking about how you might change your housing in retirement, that's an excellent time to start, because if you're going to make a move as you retire, then you are going to be changing your housing arrangements anyway. And it makes sense to think about some of the considerations that I raised at that time. Anytime you're thinking about changing your living arrangements at retirement, after retirement, it's, I think, helpful to think about this sort of thing. Even if what we've heard, 60 is the new 40, right? And that kind of thing. And 70 is the new 50, and you may be 70 and you may feel 50. And that's great, but it's important to recognize that you might not feel 50 next year. And so I think, I'm trying to think of how to word this appropriately. I think it's just wise to recognize that next year could be different than this year, and take that into account as you make the decision, or think through your decision about where to live next.
Right. Someone else did ask in the Q&A if this video would be available after the presentation is over, and I'd like to answer that. Yes, it will. We will post it, post the entire presentation on the Sensible Financial YouTube channel, which we'll have a link on their website as well. And then you'll get an email with the links to that after the presentation, so everyone can be able to, if they missed the beginning or something. Someone else asked, Nancy asks, if anyone had any experience with the greenhouse model or the neighborhood network communities. I've been reading about that a lot lately myself.
I would say not specifically with that model, but we have experience, or a little bit of experience, with the Beacon Hill Village model, which I suspect is not dissimilar, I'm guessing. And the idea is that the community provides support, so that one can find a a neighborhood, I guess, where there are other similarly situated people, and the community as a whole works together to provide support for people who are um, uh, living in retirement. And I think that's a very interesting model and a very interesting alternative to consider. We're going to talk in a little bit about the range of options that's available for uh, uh, the types of housing that are available and the kinds of choices that one should consider.
Sure. Robert asks a question here. Do you have any observations on how a senior should be approached to soften their view of being self-sufficient? How do we prepare them or ourselves for getting in-home assistance or the move to an assisted living facility?
This is a difficult question, and I think that my best answer is that this conversation in a family or among friends is a long conversation, and it works best if it begins early and isn't just a kind of a one-off conversation where I think it's very difficult to have one single sit down with a person and say, I think that you need to change the way you're living. I've observed that you're a little less certain on your feet, let's say, or something like that. That's very difficult. If one starts earlier and has a good relationship, then one can have a conversation about what the person hopes to accomplish over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, what's important to them, how they're thinking about their living arrangements. Are there things that they're concerned about? Are there things that the person who's having the conversation could be helpful with? And but if it's an ongoing back and forth conversation in a strong relationship, it's much easier to have that conversation and potentially influence the person in question to make a decision that may be in their best interest. Something else that can be helpful here is to involve a professional. And the professional can be asked to give advice about, let's say, the next choice, the next decision that's being made, or to come in and look at the current environment and make observations about how it might be modified a little bit to make it safer, to make it easier for the person to operate. And the professional may have license to say things that you as a friend or child might not, and may also have more credibility because they're an expert. Now I'll share a story about my mother, who lived alone and insisted on living alone and would not listen to any of her children. And then her doctor said that she couldn't stay in her house anymore. And that was it. Then she was ready and went out with my sister and found a place that she was comfortable to move to. So I think when we're thinking about communicating with people about difficult subjects, it doesn't necessarily have to be you that does it. It can be helpful to involve someone else.
Here's a question. are there any specific good ways to see if an area you're considering moving to has good medical support, or things like shuttle services for seniors? Do you know of any resources, I believe?
Resources. Um, that is a really good question. And I do not know the answer to that question. That's something that we can do a little research on and perhaps come back with in one of the next sessions. I'm thinking that it should be easy, or there should be resources, but I do not know of them right now. So we'll make a note.
Might be local senior centers might have things like that.
I'm sure, but I think that we could probably do a little research and have a resource list.
Let's see. Okay, and another question about the greenhouse model. Wouldn't the greenhouse model depend on having a community full of people of a varied age range?
I think
So that
I think it
that's
does.
how they're set up.
I think it does. Yes, I think that the basis of it is having a community of people who can help each other, and that necessitates that people be at sort of different stages of life and with different requirements that vary one to another, so that they can help each other out.
Right. Someone else presented just for everyone's information that it's an opinion piece, but it's a piece in the Wall Street Journal from November 29th called "At Home in the Retirement Center." And it was written by Jane Shaw Stroup, the widow of Richard Stroup, the economist. And it deals with options for older adult living. And also someone else mentions that there is an age-friendly community initiative that the World Health Organization has organized. And there is a US connected initiative, and this person is from Chicago and says that they're working on one in Chicago. And in upstate New York, they have them as well. So just so you know.
Great. So we can add that perhaps to a resource list as
Right, well. Absolutely. Thank you for telling us about that. I believe that's all the questions we have right now.
Okay.
The presentation is going to continue, and then there's going to be another place for questions at the end. So if you come up with more questions, just type them into the Q&A while Rick and Laura are talking, and they'll answer them later.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay.
Okay. There's a large spectrum of older adult living situations that vary based on how much care you need and the delivery model that you select. So it may be that you need no care and you're able to remain fully independent. You may need some help, or you may need a lot of help. The extremes of the delivery model are doing it yourself and hiring it out. If you choose to do it yourself and you need no care, you can continue to remain in your home. If you have some care needs, you can bring in some support in your home. More care if needs increase, all the way up to having someone available to help you 24/7 at the extreme. If you choose to hire it out, you can move to an independent living when you have no care requirements. As some help is required, you can bring in help and remain in independent living rather. With more care needs, you might move to an assisted living that'll provide more support and care. And at the extreme there, nursing facilities would be able to provide a lot of care. CCRCs, those are continuing care retirement communities, offer all of those arrangements. So independent living, assisted living, and nursing care on one campus. And this particular arrangement allows you to transition all the way from independent living to assisted living or nursing care if that's required. There's also some options that fall in between the extremes here of doing it yourself or hiring it out. And I think Rick has touched on these before. There may be some family members that can provide some support, and you may also have community resources like Beacon Hill Village or the Village to Village Network as examples there. Okay. All right, so we've touched on the options here. So we talked about independent living, assisted living, and nursing care. Independent living offer more than just what you might receive if you're living in a standalone apartment or in your house. So there may be things like on-site restaurants and organized social activities. Some care and support may be offered there as well. Assisted living provides more significant support than independent living. It typically includes most or all of your meals. Many activities are available at the facilities, and you have access to plenty of care. Nursing facilities would add more care than what's typically included in assisted living. And as we mentioned on the last slide, CCRCs contain all of those levels of care under one umbrella.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of do-it-yourself approaches and hiring it out. If you do it yourself, you get exactly what you want. There is less or no requirement that you adapt to a structure that other people have designed because you designed it yourself. And it may be just what you need. But you have to arrange it all yourself. And in order to do that, if you want it to be resilient, you may need to do a lot of research, or you may need to hire help to help you with the design. Or you may be constantly redesigning your arrangement as your needs change. It's possible that your solution may not adapt well to changing needs. And then finally, you may find that socializing becomes difficult or even impossible if you're not connected into let's say one of those community networks or to a community of people who are similarly situated. And your family may be stuck providing support and care. And that can be a big burden on your family. And then there is what I call the management problem. As people get older, they may be less able to manage, they may be less interested in managing. And they or you may not notice that you've become less interested in managing and less able to manage, or you may be too embarrassed to ask for help. People on this webinar may have seen this with their own parents, their own grandparents. And this is a really difficult situation. It poses risk for you, and it induces anxiety in your children, in your family, and in your friends. But it happens pretty often. And it can be helpful to anticipate this possibility. And because it may come on sort of without you really noticing it. So you can ask in advance for help from family and friends. You can ask them to kind of watch out for this. And also you can hire help with finances, with decision making, with getting things done. And this may be the best solution for people without children or for people whose children live far away. And this is, while this may not be likely, it is it's a real problem if it happens and you haven't anticipated or haven't planned for it. And it can produce an emergency, kind of a slow motion train wreck. You know, things just kind of stack up until there's the straw that, now I'm mixing metaphors, but for example, bills pile up and nobody knows until somebody cuts off the utilities or something like that. So this is just something to watch out for if you are doing things yourself. If you do decide to do it yourself, and this is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, we recommend thinking far ahead and considering multiple possibilities. So what are some of the challenges that might occur? And what would you do then? And here is a case where failure to plan can create an emergency for you and for others. So the planning is really important. There's wisdom in humility. You can't plan for every contingency, and you can't or may not be able to do everything. There are professionals that work in this area, and they can be very helpful. And then finally, as the last slide suggested, recognize that you may not want to and may not be able to manage at some point, and think about the support that you might leverage at that point.
Some of the advantages of choosing to hire out is that you're delegating management to experts who have seen it before. It can become easier to access socialization and activities. And if we're thinking about CCRCs, they exist to ease transitions if they're required over time. So as a result, CCRCs are shock resistant logistically. As you need the care, they're there to assist making those transitions. They also may be shock resistant from a financial perspective if you're considering a type A CCRC. There's a lot of different kinds of CCRCs, but type A CCRCs typically have monthly fees that do not change based on your care requirement. Whether you're independent or whether you're requiring nursing care, that fee may not change. So in those situations, it could be shock resistant from a financial perspective. Disadvantages on this end would be that, there's a limited menu for you to choose from. You might not like any of the options that are available where you want to be. If the fit is poor, you may be stuck. I think what we mean by that is there's often large sunk costs when considering these types of arrangements. There may be non-refundable entry fees or parts of entry fees that are non-refundable. Additionally, moving is very disruptive, and it could become a lot to move once and then find out it's not a good fit and try to move again. It can be burdensome, and it might not work out well. So there could be more disruption. And it may involve making substantial changes to your typical routine. You're changing your living arrangement. Things look a lot different in a different housing arrangement. One last point here. You might think that hiring it out is going to always be more expensive than doing it yourself. And that can be the case, but it's also possible to spend a lot doing it yourself, especially if you end up needing substantial amounts of care. Okay. So if you decide you want to hire it out, we think planning ahead is essential. It works best to plan well before a move is required, and this will allow you to be thoughtful and well prepared for making those changes. There are consultants you can use to help with this. They can help assess your current needs and potential future needs. They also are able to provide information about communities and resources in your area, and they may be helpful in identifying information that can be important in your decision making that may not be obvious as you're thinking about these things. We think it's a very good idea to visit and learn more about the options that you find appealing, the ones you're considering if you want to hire it out. And this is crucial to help avoid surprises and ensure that you're making a decision about a place that is a best fit for you. So careful planning is the key there, because the mistakes can be costly and harder to correct.
And if I can add here, we have now a great deal of experience with people who are trying to make decisions about where to move in the Boston area. And there are a lot of options, and it can be overwhelming to think them all through, to find them all, or even to find a list of options. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to assess what it would be like to live in one of these places without visiting. And even if you do visit, you're trying to, you'll find that you're trying to assess, excuse me, not just the facilities, but how good is the restaurant? What's the culture like? Because when you move into one of these communities, you're acquiring a lot of new neighbors, and there is a culture, and it's very helpful to know in advance whether you're going to fit or not. But it's very difficult to tell from even an overnight stay whether the culture is one that you'd be comfortable with. And people who are knowledgeable about this, and we're talking about the experts that Laura mentioned, can be very helpful in helping you develop a shorter list that aligns with your needs and preferences, and then helping you with the visits so that you're sure to get all of the information that you need to make a good decision. Okay. So Carrie, we're back to taking questions again.
Okay. Well, Ross wanted to know what your take was on reverse mortgages and if they might be useful in planning and making your housing more flexible.
The possibility of using a reverse mortgage to I'm not sure that I would characterize it as making your housing more flexible. I think certainly the reverse mortgage allows you to access the resources that your home represents, and it allows you to extract equity from the home and use it for spending purposes. And if you want to stay in your home and you're comfortable and confident that you can stay in your home, that can be a very useful mechanism. The risk is that you may use all of the equity that you can use, and you may still need more resources, and then it may not be as helpful as you had hoped. So if you're going to do it, it's important to have a plan for sort of a contingency plan. If you have a lot of resources in your house, if your house is valuable relative to the other needs that you have, then the reverse mortgage can work very well. It's really case specific.
Stephen asks, what are the typical ages in which people go into the different older adult living options? Do you happen to know?
I wouldn't say, certainly we can't tell you what's typical, because we don't have the sort of population-wide experience. I think that people move in at all sorts of different ages. Some people move in to independent living in their early 60s. Some people don't move into let's say an independent living or assisted living until they're in their 80s. So there's a very, and some never move in, right? So it's a very wide range. I think rather than age related, it may be to a certain extent a bit more capability related. So people sort of self-assess and see what their capabilities are and say, I'm fine now, but in 5 years, I'm not sure. And now would be a good time, right? Because I might need help in 3 or 5 years, and I'd like to uh, I don't want to have to make this move, right? And I think that's a really important point. If you're going to move to independent living or a CCRC, you want it to be a choice that you are making kind of actively rather than having the choice be forced upon you because your physician says, you have you fall and you end up in the hospital and your doctor says you can't go home, right? That your home is no longer safe. And now you're forced to make a decision in a hurry about where you're going to move. And you don't have time to think, and you may be limited by which of the options that you have actually has space. Whereas if you are doing this in a forward thinking way, then you can get on a waiting list. And as space becomes available, then you can decide whether you want it or not. So I guess I would say that maybe thinking about it a little before you think it's time would be a good idea. So if you're always saying, I'll think about it next year, eventually it will be too late. But if you say, I think about it next year, and then say, no, this year probably would be better.
A couple of people mentioned hiring out and the advantages and disadvantages. But one person pointed out that it's essential to watch out for who you're hiring, to make sure you're hiring a reputable company, to vet these people, to make sure you're doing your due diligence.
So that when we talk about hiring out here, and we're talking about there are different kinds of hiring out, and I think perhaps we could have been clearer. So you can hire experts to help you make decisions. So you can hire someone who's kind of an elder care consultant who is knowledgeable about various options, and there some caution is required. In some cases, people like that are retained by or paid by the institutions that they're giving advice about, and so you want to be clear about how they're being paid. You can also think about if you're hiring help in, and so if you're planning to live at home and you're planning and you need help, and so you hire someone to come in and help, and there are companies that provide that, who do vet their staff and compensate their staff and do things like pay for workers' compensation insurance and other things that are important to do when you're dealing with an employee like that. And using an organization for that is, I think, very helpful. And I think that's good advice.
Someone also asks, what is the job title of the consultant that you would retain for this? I remember Karen Wasserman was,
right.
She was a life care manager.
Yes, I think that's right. And that's a very good point. On our website, and I think she's on our YouTube page as well, there's a series of vignettes from a presentation that Karen Wasserman gave And I think there's also the full presentation, which I think is about an hour long. And Karen has, I think, very good insight into how to choose a housing option. And she's an example of the kind of person that we recommend.
Okay, Janet asks, do your housing plans ever include a two-step program? For example, an initial downsize for 10 to 15 years, like 65 to 80, and then a move to a place with more services.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lots of people do that. Lots of people plan that way. And I think that's a very reasonable way to plan. That's a good model for thinking about things. And that's, if you will, that's a transition between doing it yourself and hiring it out. And I think that can make a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it's important if you're going to do that to kind of keep your eyes open for that transition, and for the second transition, and not to just to pay attention to how things are developing, because you don't want to push that second transition too late. But I think it's a good model.
People have some interesting questions. You've mentioned this in other webinars, but do you know the cost of a private room in a nursing home setting in Massachusetts?
We know the median, and I want to say, and Laura, you may have a better idea. I want to say $130,000 a year. Does that sound right?
I think 150 is closer, but we're also going to be talking about cost more specifically in the next webinar.
Right. Thank you.
Great. So, and the question that's come up a couple times, can you address how non-wealthy people can afford one spouse in a care setting and one in a home, especially if they don't qualify for Medicaid, but they don't necessarily have the cash on hand to pay for it? Medicaid might be an option eventually, but that also limits options to nursing.
Yeah. This is something that we'll address directly with the next webinar. Good. That's a difficult question.
There's also someone talking about one of the issues with CCRCs, which we're going to talk about later, is that they don't necessarily take people with mild dementia, with any kind of dementia. So even though one in the couple is totally healthy, the other one is not fully healthy, but now because they wouldn't take them, they're in a bad way. I mean, they're
right. So I think that something that's very important to understand about CCRCs, and especially about CCRCs that have what Laura mentioned as the type A contract, where the fee does not vary depending upon the amount of care that's required. They are in the long-term care insurance business. In effect, they are providing long-term care insurance, because they're saying, you pay us a fixed amount, and if you need lots of care, we'll cover it. And in effect, what they're doing is underwriting when they say, well, we can't take someone who has mild dementia because the chances are greater, the odds are greater, that person will need long-term care, lots of services. And that there's a sense in which if they admit that person, they're running the risk that they won't be able to afford to provide the care. So if the CCRC with a type A contract, and we're going to talk about this in the last webinar, but if a CCRC with a type A contract is something that's of great interest to you, then starting earlier rather than later makes sense because of that underwriting issue.
A person also mentions, here's an example of cost in Illinois. this person paid $116,000 for the year for 24/7 caregivers, while also paying $4,000 a month for her independent living apartment in a seniors
Right.
complex. So it's gonna vary
I think
quite a
there's
bit.
just an enormous range of costs. And so I think that attempting to put a single figure out there as what it costs is no matter what figure we pick is going to be misleading.
Okay, I think you've answered all the questions. And as Rick and Laura have both mentioned, a lot of the things that perhaps they weren't able to address specifically in this, they're going to address in future webinars, because we do have 3 coming up. But I'll let you finish today's presentation.
Thank you, Carrie.
You're welcome.
Okay, so to sum up, the future is unknown, and when I'm thinking about the future, I try sometimes to think back, however far. I'm trying to think forward and think about how much has happened in that period of time. So if we're planning for 20 years, think back 20 years and think about how much of what happened during that 20 years you could have predicted 20 years before. And I think the answer is a lot of things happen that you can't predict. But even though that's true, there are still maps and guides that can be useful. So even though we don't know exactly what's going to happen, we can say, and we can be specific about the kinds of challenges that might occur. We can be specific about the kinds of housing options that are available. And we can also ask for help from expert professionals to help us think this through. Secondly, personal preference plays a huge role in all of this. And some of the solutions that we outline may just not be right for you. And so it's really important to find a solution that you like, because you're going to be living with it for a long time. And housing arrangements are a major part of life, and they have a huge influence on our quality of life. Thinking ahead can help a lot. You can't predict what will happen, what you'll need, but you can do basic contingency planning. What if this a certain category of events occurred? What would we do then? What about category B of events? What would we do then? Planning and preparation make responding smoother and easier. They can't make it perfect, but they can make it less frenetic, less less difficult in the event. And I guess I would just say in closing that we've seen a number of situations where clients have been have sort of been caught up by events, and the it did not work out as well as it might have done had they done a bit more planning and taken action a bit earlier. Okay, so that concludes the webinar. Next time we'll talk about long-term care, providing an overview of planning and insurance. That's on the 17th. As Carrie said, that's a Thursday. The third webinar is basic housing options for older adults. That's March 10th. And the last one is an introduction to continuing care retirement communities. And that will be the 21st of April. Thank you all for coming. The webinar will be available on our both on our website and on our YouTube channel. And that will happen soon. And I wish you all a good afternoon.